Well, hello everybody. Here we are again. Get to talk about one of my favorite groups of fishes today. This is a lecture devoted almost exclusively to the family Centrarchidae, which are the sunfishes. Fairly small family, but an important one for fisheries. This species on the title slide is long-ear sunfish. You can see the elongated operculum flap on it. Long ear and a number of the other centrarchid species can get to be very beautifully colored. It can almost look like a tropical fish, like a tropical cichlid or something that you might find in Africa. Gorgeous species. This one behind me is, you might think it's a largemouth bass, but this is actually the Guadalupe bass, which is the state fish of Texas. Believe it or not, they named their state fish after a species that is truly endemic to Texas. This bass species lives in high, fast-flowing, higher gradient for Texas streams, bedrock sort of situation. It actually is highly threatened by hybridization with things like smallmouth bass that have been stocked into the native range of Guadalupe bass. It's a species that's in some trouble, but great that it's the state fish of Texas. Oh, and show and tell today. So for show and tell today, I brought a little pamphlet. It's just titled Bluegills here. And this is a little pamphlet that I helped some folks work on when I was in Wisconsin. And it was done by the Cooperative Extension Group at University of Wisconsin, and they wanted to make a little pamphlet on bluegills, species of sunfish that we'll talk about, but aimed at kids. So in Wisconsin, bluegills are kind of the most common species that you might catch. In parts of California, that's the case too. And so we made this little book for kids. It has different chapters on it. You know, what is a bluegill? Where do they live? What do they eat? The food pyramid, the life cycle, fish-friendly shorelines, which talks about how to keep your lake shoreline healthy. What do bluegills need? So here's kind of, you know, how you identify an adult bluegill and a juvenile bluegill, what they look like. Here's, you know, where they live. They live in kind of marshy habitat. Here's some maps. What do they eat? You know, they eat these little zooplankton and crustaceans. Here's the lake food. Here's the food pyramid for a lake that a bluegill might occupy, and kind of what it eats, what eats it. Here's the life cycle of a bluegill. We'll talk a little bit about that. The fascinating life cycle. But you know, one thing that I'm kind of passionate about is, yes, we should all be excellent scientists at whatever we choose to do in science and fish science or what have you. But I sort of strongly believe that we also need to be great science communicators. And, you know, working on things like this might not seem like the type of thing a scientist would normally do. But, you know, I think the Earth is changing so much and so fast that we all need to kind of do things to, you know, help people recognize what's in their backyard, help people realize what it takes to practice conservation, and I think particularly with kids, you know, kids are increasingly more urban, they're inside more, they're not connected with nature as much as they have been in previous generations. And we need to reach out to kids like that and you know, try to educate as much as we can and kind of show them what's neat about where they live. So there's my show and tell and my soapbox for a couple minutes. Thanks for listening. I realize I've gone over on time by a couple minutes on a few of the previous lectures, so I want to try to make this one a little bit quicker to see if I'm successful or not, but hopefully you'll appreciate a slightly quicker lecture today. Ah. Okay. So fish art for today are jewelry. This is from the Wampanoag tribe near Massachusetts from around 4,000 years ago. These are Atlantic cod otoliths. Otoliths, we'll talk more about them later in a different lecture, but otoliths are calcified bones in the head of a fish. One sits on both sides of the brain case of a fish, and they let fish know, they give them a sense of equilibrium in the water, let them know if they're right side up or not. They kind of float in a little clear liquid on either side of the brain. But they can be extracted from individual fish. They live on rings just like trees do. So biologists can use them to estimate the age of fish, the longevity of different species. But they've been used for millennia by indigenous peoples as jewelry, as tools. There are a lot of marine species have very large otoliths. They can be, almost the size of a $50. So just used in lots of different ways, but these are just some, I think, beautiful pieces of jewelry that use fish otoliths. In terms of sunfish art, this is another example of gyotaku, which again is that ancient Japanese form of fish printing where you would cover a fish carcass in ink, and traditionally they would actually use bark instead of paper to make the printing. Nowadays they have nice sorts of paper that you can use, but usually you make the printing with black ink, and then the artist can go in after the fact and color with colored pencils or paint. So in this case, the yellow eye on this fish might have been done in probably a pencil of some sort. Maybe the orange breast and the caudal fin as well. It's a lovely form of art. There's a former WFCB professor named Christopher Dewey's that actually has a whole book on the art of gyotaku using fishes. Every now and then he does book signings around Davis. You can keep an eye out for that. This book is available in a lot of local bookshops in Davis too, if you're interested. But he does some great gyotaku and native Davisite. Here's just a simple watercolor of a pumpkin seed sunfish. We're looking at sunfish art at this point. I'm a sucker for watercolors personally. This is actually a pumpkin seed about to strike a fishing lure. This is actually a sculpture of a largemouth bass that put in by the city of Palatka, Florida. Really into bass in Florida, bass and bass fishing in Florida. So they have sculptures for bass down there. This is an orange spotted sunfish. Orange spotted sunfish, one of my favorite sunfish species. These live in floodplain lakes. They don't get very big, but they can be very colorful. They get this orange coloration on the tips of their fins. They have a white back to the operculum flap. Anyways, these are, this is a work of art done by somebody named Joseph Tomilleri, who does a lot of fish art for various fish books and auctions for conservation kind of things. We'll auction off some of his work for conservation things. These are all done with colored pencils, believe it or not. It looks like almost a photo or, I don't know, you'd think digital art or something, but actually this is Tomilleri going in and doing all of this color, all of these patterns by hand with colored pencils. It's pretty extraordinary. And I believe Tomilleri has almost every freshwater fish in North America done at this point. So really some exceptional pieces out there. A lot of in fact, the background that we're looking at, this Guadalupe bass background, this is also a Tomilleri. Just excellent fish art. This is the same artist. This is Tomilleri again. This is doing long-ear sunfish. This is the species that was on the title slide. Again, just exceptional abilities there. And I'll talk about Sacramento perch in a minute, but every year I try to find good fish art of Sacramento perch, which is our native California sunfish species, and there's never any. So I show this old drawing and painting of Sacramento perch that I found in a book, and just sort of pointing out that we do not have enough good fish art of Sacramento perch out there. So if you're looking for a great species to do some fish art on, let me tell you about the Sacramento perch. Okay, so here's our massive table. If you're wondering where the sunfish species are that we're going to talk about, they're all the way at the bottom. So then the superorder Acanthopterygii, spiny fin fishes. So these are highly bony fishes. They're younger, and they're in the division Teleostei. They're an actinopterygian, so they share all those features that actinopterygians have. You know, they have the double-chambered swim bladder, they have the Weberian apparatus, they have all those sorts of things. They're in that superorder Acanthopterygii, and they're in the order Perciformes, which is they call the perch. Now, sunfish are not a perch. Like you'll hear people say, "Oh, that's a ocean perch," or "that's a yellow perch," or whatever. Sunfish aren't that, but they are in this broad order of Perciformes, which people do sometimes refer to as the perch order. It's a non-monophyletic group that remains pretty difficult to define and describe. It has a lot of species in it, greater than 3,000 species in the Perciforme order. Again, that's a pretty good chunk of global diversity just right there in this one order, just in an order. You know, not possible to describe all of the species based on morphology alone, but there are features that are common to most taxa. You have spines present in a lot of the major types of fins. They have ctenoid scales, which have the teeth along the tips of it. They have thoracic pelvic fins with one spine and 5 rays. So one spine coming out of the fin and then 5 soft rays coming out of it. You know, until the relationships are better resolved in this group, we continue to affiliate several lineages with the rise of this group. So there's lots of different types of species in here. You know, you have snooks, which are in the family Centropomidae. These are a big deal down in Florida, down in Belize. Can be strongly affected by cold fronts that come through that can sometimes wipe out snook populations. You have the temperate basses, which are in order Perciformes. That includes things like striped bass, white bass. Some people call them striped bass, some people call them stripers. White perch, I believe. And then you have the snappers in here. This is in the family of Legenidae. So you have red snappers. Schoolmaster snappers and dog snappers, and there's a whole bunch of different types of snapper species. So again, very diverse group. Lots going on in order Perciformes. We're going to focus on the family Centrarchidae. So Centrarchidae is below, within the order Perciformes. There's only 37 extant species. These all have a minimum of 3 anal spines, dorsal spines that range from 5 to 13 in number. Most of the species have 10 to 12. The pseudobranch or first gill arch is very small and concealed. For most of the sunfish species, the males are nest builders and garters. Even for the ones that aren't, we still think that they build kind of rudimentary nests. So it is a key behavioral thing we see among centrarchid species, is this tendency to nest build. Now, just by way of knowing that, you can tell a little bit something about where sunfish species might live based on the fact that the males nest build. So, would you expect nest builders to do quite well in very fast flowing rivers that flood a lot and have stochastic kind of hydrologic variation? The answer is no. Nests are an evolutionary adaptation for hydrologic conditions that are quite predictable. So sunfish tend to do really well in lakes. They tend to do well in slow-moving streams. There are species like the Guadalupe bass that live in faster portions of streams, but even there, where they spawn, they'll spawn off-channel in the slower-moving portions of those systems. So nest building really is an adaptation that provides parental care, but they are making a calculated risk by nest building that the environment will be somewhat stable such that that nest will hold up to the environmental variation that might be there. A lot of recreational valuable species in here, notably the black basses, things like largemouth bass, but bluegill and other types of sunfish can be highly prized by anglers as well. Many species are globally invasive. They've been introduced all over the world, including in California. There's a lot of non-native centrarchids, a lot of Mississippian species that are well established in California now. We'll talk about some of them. So this is the main phylogeny of the sunfish species. And I'm gonna just kind of hit the highlights here. And of course, all of these species are interesting, but we only have time to hit on some of the more interesting ones. So we're gonna start off with the Sacramento perch, which is the Californian, if you ever watched that skit on SNL. What you'll notice is that the species Archopleides interruptus, that's Sacramento perch, it's in the genus Archopleides. It's the only species in that genus. And if you look at the species that it's most closely related to, you'll find it's this genus Ambopleides down here, which has 4 extant species, at least as we're constructing it now. That includes, let's see, it's shadow bass on the top, rock bass is the second one. The third one is the Roanoke bass. And the fourth one is Ozark bass. But I could show you pictures of those species and you would find that they look quite similar to the Sacramento perch. They have a very similar sort of blotching pattern along the side. They're dark. They have a similar body shape, but the Sacramento perch does look quite distinct, and it does make sense that it's its own thing. Now above Archopleides is the genus Pomoxis, which we'll talk about that later. That is actually the crappies, and indeed Sacramento perch do resemble crappie a good bit, and their behavior is quite similar to crappie as well. So that's where Sacramento perch sit in terms of the phylogeny. Oh, look at this. I'm so smart. I put this in beforehand. So here is actually shadow bass, which is, that's Ambopleides eremonis here. And so you can see kind of how similar they are. They have that similar sort of blotching pattern. Mouth shape's a little bit different. Color is a little bit different, but they're quite similar. The rock bass is Ambopleides rupestris. Again, kind of quite similar, but you can tell that they're different things. So this is the only native sunfish species in California. It's native to the Central Valley, which is where Davis is. It prefers habitat that's slow water. Surprise, surprise with the nest builders. Heavily vegetated oftenly. They like slows and floodplain lakes. They can be identified notably by those irregular vertical bars that are going up and down. They were historically found throughout the Central Valley, but at fairly low elevations, so below 100 meters. That's not the case anymore. They've been eliminated from about 90% of their native habitat due to habitat construction. That's mainly related to the loss of floodplain habitat throughout the Central Valley, but also very intensely are negatively affected by egg predation and competition by invasive sunfish species. So things like green sunfish, bluegill, pumpkin seed sunfish, these other non-native sunfishes, they tend to really bother Sacramento perch. And sometimes you can have a population of sac perch in, say, a farm pond or a lake, an urban pond, something like that. And it'll be great. You'll be like, wow, this is great. This great native population of sac perch. And then you'll get, somebody will release bluegill or somehow some of these non-native sunfish get into the system. And they will very, very quickly, almost completely eradicate sac perch. Often eradicating, sometimes almost eradicating, but they just don't seem to be hardy enough to stand up to some of these non-native competitors. So the invasive species dynamic is a major factor in the decline of sac perch. But you can see how the California landscape has been modified in pretty substantial ways over time. So what I have here on the left is the first ever satellite photo taken of California in 1851. Kidding. So it's not an actual satellite photo. This is an artistic reconstruction of what a satellite photo from California in 1851 would have looked like by a fellow named Mark Clark. Now on the right is an actual satellite photo from 2015 from NASA. So it's a pretty useful heuristic exercise to just put these side by side and look at how have things changed over time. And again, this would be a moment in class where I would ask you to tell me what do you see that's different in these photos. But since we can't do that, I'm just going to kind of move through and just to explain some things. So you can see a lot of things that are very different in these two photos. One is, okay, let's just look at how much water and greenness there is throughout the state. So you see how green the Central Valley was. There was a lot of water moving through the Central Valley. All the snow melt that came off of the mountains wound up in the Central Valley, and it would flow through the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River out into the Delta. If you look at Southern California, there was so much water, there was a giant lake in Southern California. That's known as Lake Tulare, and it was one of the largest natural lakes in North America. You could have actually taken ferries from like Bakersfield to other large cities. It was a massively large lake that has obviously been drained, converted into mostly agricultural land. So that's different. That there's some serious water extraction going on in California, you can tell. Secondly, you can tell that there was more snow in the mountains. So look at all the white compared to on the right. So over time, we have lost snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which also creates less runoff into the Central Valley. You can see even in Southern California, you can see how much greener the vegetation was in portions of Southern California. So it's just really a very different landscape. And so sac perch are adapted to the picture on the left. That's what they evolved for millions of years under. The picture on the right is what they're stuck dealing with. So it's a tough proposition for a species like that. Yeah, so Tulare Lake, one of the largest freshwater bodies west of the Great Lakes, 700 square miles in area. Could have taken a boat from Bakersfield to Stockton. That's amazing. It was a shallow lake. It wasn't particularly deep, but it covered a large fraction of the land area down there. It reminds me a little bit of this story. This is the Aral Sea, which is, I believe on the border of Russia and Kazakhstan. And these are real satellite photos. The picture on the left is of the Aral Sea in the late 80s. And somebody got the bright idea that the desert land around the Aral Sea would be really good for cotton farming, which is a very water-intensive crop. And so slowly but surely, they functionally drain the Aral Sea down to this picture on the right. They basically almost completely eradicated the lake. So I think, people can often be surprised at the intensity of the ways that people can alter ecosystems. And this is a pretty good example. The Aral Sea used to have a fishery in it. By 2014, the fish population had been eradicated. There just wasn't enough water for fish to live. This is basically what happened with California and with Lake Tulare in the previous slide. So this kind of stuff does happen. It happens more regularly than most people think. We can make entire ecosystems just go away. Incidentally, the situation has improved in Aral Lake since, and I believe they're trying to pipe a little bit of water back into the lake. The situation has improved a little bit. Yeah, so just more pictures of this, 85, 97, 2009, and then 2017, you can see that they got a little bit of the lake back. They piped a little bit of the lake back, but it's still just a small fraction of what it used to be. This is an artistic rendering of what the Central Valley used to look like. It's from a book by Laura Cunningham called State of Change. Wonderful book, and I believe I saw a tweet from Laura Cunningham a couple months ago that said she's going to make this book available for free on her personal website. So if you're interested in this, I haven't checked actually to see if it's up yet, but I think the book costs like $600 or something on Amazon. She got mad and said, "I'm putting it up for free." Good for her. But anyways, you can see kind of what we think the Central Valley used to look like. It was a big marsh, abundant fish and wildlife. There were deer, there were bear in the Central Valley, believe it or not, that would feed on salmon, much like they do in Alaska. It's a very different type of environment. This is new sac perch habitat. Almost can't find sac perch in the valley anymore. Where you can find them are in these very high elevation lakes. This is Pyramid Lake in Nevada. Lakes that have very high pHs. This would be in the Great Basin Physiographic Province, where you get these high pHs. Eagle lakes like this, the Great Salt Lake, obviously. Neither of those have sac perch, although they probably could. But they tend to do well in these environments that other fish species can't tolerate. Sac perch seem to do quite well there. So these are kind of becoming the last refugia for species like sac perch. They spawn in May to early June, like a lot of centrarchid species. They mature at 3 years. They gather in shallow water near rock piles and submerged roots. The males defend kind of territories and sort of make rudimentary nests for females, but it's not a classic nest like you might see in bluegill. And then the males will guard those fertilized eggs for several days after they hatch. And in a lot of these centrarchid species, the males, they build the nests, and then they stay behind to guard the nests and guard the babies. Sac perch are used in aquaponics a good bit. It's sort of one of the interesting ways that people are using sac perch, which, if you're not familiar with aquaponics, it's kind of the idea that you have plants growing on top of some sort of aquarium apparatus. So you'll have fish. The fish will be fertilizing the water as they, you know, eat stuff and poop and pee and stuff. That water will then get piped up, put on roots to help plants grow, the clean water circulated back down. It's a very interesting sort of sustainability way of raising plants and fish together. Anyways, people are using this type of system with sac perch. They're also used for mosquito control a little bit. Contra Costa, down closer to the bay, is exploring deploying sac perch as a vector control species, a native vector control species, rather than mosquito fish. Okay, moving on, I'm just going to jump right up above sac perch to the Pomoxis genus. These would be the crappies. There's two species of crappie. There are black crappie and white crappie. They're native to the central U.S., the Mississippi Basin mostly, but they're found in like the Mobile Basin, some coastal streams, middle U.S. And these all have a very thin mouths, almost paper thin mouths. You can look at this is an angler holding the mouth. You can almost see through the mouth. It's so thin. That's a characteristic thing about crappies. They have just paper thin mouth. They feed on small fishes. They aggregate in schools together with one another. So when folks are fishing for them, you might not catch anything for a long time, and then you'll catch a bunch together because you'll get into a school of crappies. They tend to do better in stained waters, darker waters. They spawn in loose colonies. Their spawning behavior is quite similar to sac perch. It's sort of a rudimentary nest kind of thing. The males guard, but not as strongly as some of the other sunfishes. This is a white crappie on the right. You can see it has these vertical bars going up and down. That's kind of the characteristic to look at. Here's two side by side. So black crappie on the right, white crappie on the left. And these are the range maps below. Orange is the native range. Red is the introduced range. I don't know why there's this giant thing out in the ocean for white crappie. I know they don't occur way out in the ocean like that. So something weird about how USGS mapped that. But again, you can see sort of that vertical bar pattern of the crappie on the left. That's kind of what white crappies look like. One on the right, this is actually a spawning male. The males get real dark like this during reproductive season. So that would be a spawning male. But a lot of flecks all up and down the body, but you don't see any of that barring pattern. So that's kind of the crappie deal. Here's another picture of two side by side. Black crappie on the top, white crappie below. White crappies get a little bit bigger than black crappies. In the northern part of the U.S., you only find black crappies, and then in the southern part of the U.S., you get both species. We have both species in California. Okay, moving on to the black basses. This is obviously a very important group of fish for fishing. You know, not a ton of species in here, but a good number. So just from top to bottom here, Micropterus dolomieu, that's smallmouth bass. Below that is spotted bass. Micropterus cataractae is I think I want to say Suwannee bass. It might be Suwannee bass. I can't remember. Anyway, a kusei, Micropterus kusei, that's red-eye bass. Red-eye bass were recently split apart further into 4 to 6 other new types of species of red-eye bass. There's actually a lot of new stuff going on in Micropterus kusei. Micropterus triculi, that would be the Guadalupe bass behind me. And then Micropterus salmoides is largemouth bass, and Micropterus floridanus, that's the Florida strain of largemouth bass. So they're put together, and I think folks are kind of confused about what to do with them, whether it's its own thing or some, you know, a subspecies, or there's a little bit of, it's probably a subspecies rather than an actual species. Okay, this is a largemouth bass, which is probably the most famous species. You can see they've been planted all over the globe. This is probably pretty conservative, but they're found throughout Europe now. They're found throughout Japan. They're found all throughout South Africa. They've since invaded probably almost up to the Rift Valley lakes in Africa. Truly a global range at this point. And a lot of these black bass species occur in California. In fact, there are trophy world record fisheries for particularly largemouth bass and spotted bass in California, California reservoirs in particular. I mean, look at this fish on the left here. That's a largemouth bass. That's ridiculous. This is red-eye bass in the middle. Again, there's 4 to 6 new species, so who knows what's in California of those new species. This is spotted bass up on the upper right. They don't get quite as big as largemouth bass do. And then smallmouth bass here on the bottom right. All of these species can hybridize with each other. So it makes it a super clear situation. It's probably there's hybrids of all of these species occurring in California, and we don't know very much about it. A true California situation of a melting pot, so to speak. These are the ranges for some of these different species. So you have largemouth bass here on the top left. You know, again, native range that looks a lot like crappie. This is spotted bass on the top right. They have much more of a southeastern distribution. In fact, in their native range, they're sometimes referred to as Kentucky bass because it's the primary bass you would find in Kentucky. This is smallmouth bass on the bottom left. You can see a little bit more of a northern distribution, but again, this massive introduced range. And then this bottom right here is the red-eye bass. Again, 4 to 6 new species, so who knows, but in each of these different river systems throughout the Southeast, they've basically identified new species. So there's a black warrior species of red-eye bass. There's a Cahaba River species. There is a Chattahoochee River species. There's Sewanee River one, a Altamaha species, I believe, a Tennessee River species. Look at this, I'm remembering this stuff. Anyways, a lot of interesting stuff with that one, but they've all been introduced out in California. Okay, and then down at the bottom would be sort of the genus Lepomis, which is where you find a lot of the things that people often refer to as sunfishes. This is where bluegill are, red ear sunfish, green sunfish. I want to hit through some highlights. I won't go through all of these different species here, but just again, hitting some highlights. Starting with bluegill, you can guess where they get the name, bluegill. They have that blue operculum flap. They have a huge geographic range. They've been introduced all over the place. One thing that you can really see on a lot of bluegill specimens is this black spot on the dorsal fin. You can see it just says dark spot here, but then if you kind of look at this picture down here, you can see that dark spot almost near the watch band of this person. And if you look at them in a underwater a little bit, that black spot will be very dark. So it's a very good way to identify bluegill is by looking for that dark spot on the dorsal fin. Different fin ray counts you can look at as well, but really their biology is what's potentially most fascinating. They nest in colonies. So this picture on the bottom right here is of a colony of bluegill nests. And each disc in there is a different nest that a male has built. The males have these life histories that are very confusing but very interesting. Most males try to grow as big and as bad and buff looking as they can to attract a quality female. And often the biggest, baddest male will be situated right in the middle of these colonies. In contrast, some of the other males will that can't compete as well will be on the edges. And they'll have these nests on the edges. The best females will go to the middle of the colony. The less good females will be on the edges. And it's created these alternate male life histories, which have apparently elected to just completely opt out of that system. So instead of building nests at all or growing very much at all, what these other male bluegill will do is they become sneakers. They put all their energy into their testes. You'll open these males up and they'll have these huge testes. It looks like balloons inside of them. And they'll wait, they'll cruise around the exterior of these colonies and they'll wait for a male and female to start reproducing. And then they'll literally sneak on to the nest and empty out their testes. And basically, sometimes that's successful and they can pass on genes that way. So those are called sneakers. And then there's another type of sneaker that is colored like a female. So it's a sneaker, but instead of looking like a male, it's a female mimic. And that female mimic allows it to get even closer to these nests during reproduction than it would be if it was colored like a male, but yet they can sneak on and do the same sort of thing. Those are called satellites. So there's a lot going on under the hood with this bluegill spawning thing. I got really interested in it and studied this kind of stuff in Wisconsin a bit. There's a blog here, which is I'd like you to read if you can. It explains a little bit more about the sneaker satellite thing. Bluegill are a very popular sport fish. What a lot of anglers will do is they'll actually fish for bluegills while they're spawning like this. And because the males are aggressively defending their nest, they're quite easy to catch. And because you know that the biggest, baddest males sit in the middle of these colonies, it's a very size-selective fishery. So one of the big problems with bluegill management in the United States has been an erosion of size structure over time, primarily because of the removal of these large males from nesting colonies like this. It's very easy to do, and you can do it very quickly. You can really change the size structure very quickly. One of the things we've figured out about bluegill management is that you really want to protect those large males. You don't want to remove them from the system. When you remove them from the system, lots of things go haywire with the size structure of populations. This is a video of bluegills kind of swimming around the colonies, males defending the colonies. Let's just see if I can. I'm just gonna mute this guy's talking. But you can see these bluegills are swimming around. You know, there's basically a male assigned to each of these nests. And they're sitting there, they're guarding their one little disc. And then you have females kind of going in between the discs, checking things out. And you have sneakers kind of cruising around the edges. Anyways, it's a fascinating biology, and you could kind of watch these sorts of things for hours. It's so interesting you could lose a career to studying this kind of stuff. So anyways, I encourage you to just be mesmerized by a spawning bluegill colony some more. There are red ear sunfish. These sort of closely resemble bluegill, but they have a cherry red on the edge of their operculum flap, and they have kind of a checkerboard appearance across their body. You know, they don't have any sort of a banding color, but it's just kind of checkerboarded like that. They have a native distribution that's mostly in the southern U.S., places like Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, parts of Texas, but they are found throughout California. They're sometimes called shell crackers by anglers, and you can tell by that nickname what kind of stuff they eat. They have large pharyngeal teeth in the back of their throat that can just crush shells and crustaceans and stuff. And so if you open up a diet of a red ear, you would find just all these shell fragments. But they can hybridize with bluegill and with some of the other centrarchids, so it creates some identification challenges if you're not used to looking at bluegills and red ears and hybrids and such. But a cool species for sure. These get much larger than bluegill do. These can get 13, 14, even 15 inches, whereas bluegill kind of max out around 10, 11, 12, and those would be very big ones. This is the green sunfish. It's a beautiful species, which is part of their problem. They're so beautiful. They have these turquoise striations on their cheek. They're so beautiful. People have planted them all over the place where they shouldn't. And they're a tough customer in a fish community. They are very hardy. They're very tolerant. Oftentimes in like a very polluted system or a very channelized urban stream or something like that, you will find sometimes only green sunfish and nothing else. They're very hardy. They have these very toothy lips on them. They have a kind of an orange coloration on the margin of their fins. And they have quite a large mouth. It almost looks like a largemouth bass or something. They have a much larger mouth than a bluegill would, which has kind of like a much more narrow, kind of probing looking mouth. The green sunfish. Okay, so those are some highlights. For your participation credit for today's lecture, I want you to just imagine that you're a fish manager that has a blue ribbon bluegill fishery, and you've had size declines because people are fishing on the spawning beds, kind of like I described. I want you to just kind of think about what are some potential fishing restrictions that could possibly be useful in managing your way out of that situation. What are some like fishing regulations that might make a difference, might help restore some of that size structure? And so you can just come up with like a list of potential types of fishing regulations. And then I want you to then also think about and answer whether you think anglers would be amenable to those regulations or not. Do you think you could sell that regulation so that people would use it? That's your participation credit. A couple other things I want you to do. I want you to read a chapter on reproduction by Helfman et al. on Canvas. We'll cover that next week. And also the blog that I mentioned on bluegill. And that'll do it. I finished a little early, not as early as I wanted, but a little early. So thank you, and I will catch you next time.